Hi, welcome everyone, and thank you, Peter, and thank you for joining us and welcome. I don't know, many of you may know Peter or have heard of him. I had not, and someone introduced me, and so I reached out, and after a 30-minute conversation, I walked away wiser and inspired, and so I'm really looking forward to this. Peter has been to 9 Olympics. He's written several books. He's worked with many pro and amateur sports teams, including our women's national hockey team and the multiple World Junior projects, and he teaches at Queen's and Cornell. And thanks very much, Peter, for joining us and sharing your expertise.
My pleasure. Are we ready to roll?
We are.
All right, let's get at it. Well, good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to have the opportunity to speak to you. What I'm going to talk to you about today grows out of a book I wrote a while back called Ignite the Third Factor. And the book grew out of an experience I had at the Athens Olympics where I was rooming with a coach, and the coach's athlete in the gold medal final hit the first hurdle and went down like a ton of bricks. And at 3 in the morning, he came into the room trying not to wake me up after a horrible evening, I'm sure. He was coaching Perdita Felicien. He was head track coach at the University of Illinois. And I said to him, oh, you know, what a bummer. And he said, it's going to make us stronger. And I got interested in coaches who were really good at developing great human beings and terrific athletes. And I was on a panel yesterday in Manitoba. 400 and some odd people attended an annual lecture in honor of Cal Botterill, who's one of the founding sports psychologists way back. And I was telling them a story about walking off the floor in 1972. I was a basketball coach at the University of Victoria. And I was walking off the floor of a basketball court in Las Vegas with John Wooden, the legendary UCLA basketball coach. And I was 25 and thought I knew something about coaching, but truthfully, I didn't know my ass from page 3. And I turned to Coach Wooden. He'd run a particularly invigorating practice for an hour. And I said something about him being a great coach. And he said to me, I appreciate your comment. He was a very modest man, very quiet man. He said, I appreciate your comment, Peter, but we will not know how good a coach I've been until at least 20 years after my last player graduates. Once we say what they've done with their lives, then we'll know whether I was any good or not. And I've heard statements like that from a variety of coaches over the last 40 years. I remember one coach had above his desk a huge sign that said, if you'll be nothing without a gold medal, then you'll be nothing with a gold medal. I remember one time talking to Doug Lee, Brian Orser, and Elvis Stoikos, figure skating coach, and we were talking about a Japanese skater he was coaching, and he said to me, you know, you got to remember all you have left in the end is the person. So what are you doing to develop that person? And so I went to the States, and I went to Great Britain and Canada, and I interviewed coaches who produced gold medalists, but also had been identified as really good developers of people, because I wanted to know what the heck do these coaches have in common. And I figured out after interviewing them all for a very long period of time that they had 5 things in common. They had lots of other things they did, but these are 5 things they had in common. They were really good at managing themselves. They consciously built trust with their athletes. They didn't expect it to fall out of the sky. They encouraged and used imagery. They understood that, to put it bluntly, imagery is the language of performance. People cannot do things they can't imagine. And they treated that factually. In other words, it wasn't a cute little bumper sticker. They actually understood how it works, and we'll talk to that. When their athletes were blocked, when they weren't moving forward, rather insisting that they work harder or they push themselves harder, they spent some time trying to figure out what the block is. And often the block is back in the imagination, and that's where you got to work. Of all of the expressions and sayings I know of that I have heard, over the last 74 years in my life, the one that I would say has been most meaningful to me has been a very simple phrase from Lao Tse, and it's probably 3,000 or 4,000 years ago now. And he simply said, what's in the way is the way. What's in the way is the way. And that's been incredibly helpful to me over my career at figuring out, well, what's blocking somebody? What's getting in the way of this person's moving forward and with that, whatever it is they're working on. And finally, and boy, does this ever come into it in the current climate, they're really good at embracing adversity. Adversity comes with the territory. You know, if you can't handle adversity, what are you doing coaching in sport? I mean, it's just ripe with it. It's everywhere, isn't it? And so what I want to do is I want to walk through these 5 things, but more importantly, I want to talk to the teach points in them. Theory is of no value, truthfully. I mean, it's interesting sometimes, but I'm much more interested in things that are usable, that are practical, that you can do. And so to that end, I've come up with 3 little tips on each of these things that you might find helpful, right? Again, because after 3, it's too many. So that's not going to work that way. So let's try it this way. The middle of the model, as you may have noticed here, says communications. Oh, it doesn't. It says, here you go. It says communication skills. And that's how you apply your trade as a coach. Now, I didn't realize I'd slip past the slide, so I'm going to stop and talk about this first, because you're going to wonder what in tarnation is third factor. You know, when I ask people what factors determine whether someone reaches their potential or not, invariably we end up in the same place, nature and nurture. Is it what they're born with, or is it how I coach them, how they're raised, their upbringing, etc.? What is the single biggest factor? And my mentor in psychology was a Polish psychiatrist named Kazimierz Dąbrowski. And he's a very interesting man, very learned man. And he said one day, you know, we have a bunch of behaviorists here. This was the School of Psychology at the University of Alberta back in the 70s. He said, and they really believe that it's all about nurture. It's all about what you reward, you punish, etc. But they're missing the point. Obviously, that's important. And so is nature important. Anybody with more than one child can see that they're different. They're just naturally different. Some are good at math, some aren't. Some are more competitive than others. Okay? But he said there's also a third factor. And he never put another name on it. He just always called it the third factor. And as you can see, it's what the person themselves brings. Yeah? It's a person's desire to directly influence their own development. And what we're going to see as we go through this presentation is that there are 2 allies that really help you in getting another person interested in become better than they currently are. And those 2 allies are emotion and imagination. Many times we tend to work with people from a position of logic. We think if we logically explain to this skier that if they just do this, the turn's going to be tighter, or they're going to have a little quicker speed down the hill or whatever. But the truth is, very infrequently does logic change anybody. I mean, if logic changed human beings, who would smoke? Who wouldn't exercise? Who wouldn't eat healthy? Intellectually, we all know those things. It doesn't mean we do them. But emotion and imagination are the way people change. Now, from an emotional perspective, it often isn't until someone is totally dissatisfied with the way things are going right now that they move away from what is to what ought to be, that they move away from what they want to be less like to what they want to be more like. And learning to work with emotion is really important for coaches. You know, when I was at the Olympics in Torino, I had done some work just prior to Torino. The COC had brought me in to do some work with all the potential medalists at the Olympic Games and their coaches. And I'd done sessions out at Lake Louise. And when I got to the Olympics, I was asked to work as the lead sports psychologist for a Canadian team. And so that meant I went to other venues, other than the ones I was working in. Okay, I was working with Jennifer Heil, I was working with Jeffrey Buttle, a figure skater, and I was working with the women's hockey team. But I also went and I went to long track speed skating because we wanted to understand, well, what pressures are they under that are different or unique in long track? And what about this sport? And what about that sport? Yeah. And eventually that stuff all morphed into what's now called On the Podium. But at that time, we didn't have such a thing. Okay? And I went to long track speed skating one day, and I watched Christine Nesbitt skate the 1,000 meter. And she finished like 11, 12, somewhere in there. And now I'm under the arena, and I'm talking to her coach. Coach's name was Yuli Wang. Yuli's moved back to China, but she was a leading long track speed skating coach here in Canada. And the young sports psychologist I was there to meet with, who worked with that team, I did not work with them, came down under the arena and to meet with me. And Yuli and I were talking, and Christine was back in the corner there, pedaling an exercise bike. She was trying to get rid of all the lactic acid built up in her legs. She was in physical pain, but mostly she was in emotional pain. She was incredibly unhappy with her performance. So she was upset, visibly upset. She was crying a bit, quite upset, pedaling on the bike by herself. And we barely started to talk, the young sports psychologist and I, and he said, "Excuse me for a minute." And he went to walk away. And Yuli reached out and she grabbed his arm and she said to him, "Where are you going?" And he pointed over to Christine and he said, "Well, I'm going over there." Christine's very upset. I mean, come on, it's her first Olympics. You know, like, give her a break. I mean, she doesn't need to be so upset with herself over this. And listen to this coach, because this is a coach who gets it. This is not a mean-spirited person at all. It's a very nice woman. But she turned to him and she said, "Why would you rob her of her experience? Let her live with her result. Let her be. Leave her alone. Give her an hour. And then maybe you can go over." Where does Christine Nesbitt finish in Vancouver, the following Olympic Games? Top of the podium. I'm not giving you a cause and effect, but what I am saying is, this is a coach who gets it. This is a coach who gets that emotion is the fast track to the brain. And sometimes as a coach, I will accentuate the emotion. When someone's really upset and not performing well, I will say, you know, how are you going to feel 2 months from now if you still feel like this? You still haven't progressed. You still haven't moved. You're still here. Oh my God, it'd be awful, it'd be terrible. Yeah. But how will you feel 2 months from now if you move beyond this? You've worked on these things, and now this is the way you're skiing. This is where you're finishing now. How will you feel then? Oh my God, I feel so good about that. That would feel so much better. Yeah. And so what we're doing here, of course, is we're getting a push of emotion out of somewhere, and then we're using the pull of imagination to move forward. And we'll talk to imagery in a little greater depth when we get to it. Okay? Now, we communicate, the way we communicate is how we apply our trade. And Susan Scott has written the best book ever written on communication skills. It's called Fierce Conversations. We brought her in to speak to our Olympic coaches a few years back. And I like this comment. You know, her point is that you're either building or flatlining or destroying your relationship one conversation at a time. The conversation is the relationship. Your conversations with your athletes, that's the relationship. And that's the conduit along which your communication travels. You know, there's a woman on the call yesterday who was on the panel with me, and she's in Barcelona now, but she worked with the Chicago Bears football team. And she talked about one of the coaches who would go to the players. 19, you come over here. 22, you go over there. 69, come over here. Didn't even refer to them by name, you know. And she talked about that lack of relationship and how it dramatically influenced the performance. Because you see, the skills that we're going to talk about today are all about building a really strong, solid relationship with your people. Okay? And so what communication skills do you really want to learn? You want to learn to ask really good questions. You want to get really good at asking really good questions. What is the one thing that if you did it different or better in the next run would make all the difference in the world to your performance? You learn a lot then. You learn what they see as the number one thing they really need to. It might be 4 or 5 on your list, but you get a look inside how they think, how they organize their thoughts, that sort of thing. Now you got a chance. Now you know what you're dealing with. Right? Learn to listen. Asking questions and listening are really important, because let's go back to our goal. Our goal is to get these people to ignite their desire to get better. In other words, we are trying to increase self-awareness and self-responsibility in these athletes. So we coach less and they coach more to themselves. Right? We want what we say to go in more frequently and with greater solidity, right? And so we're trying to build self-awareness and self-responsibility. And you get that by asking questions and listening, reflecting back your understanding of what they said. These are key skills. I would say the really good coaches communicate about 80% of the time with really good questions. The other skill that's really important is you've got to be able to give really solid, competent, relevant feedback. Here's the problem with feedback. And I could just do a whole session on feedback. Easily, we could do an hour on feedback. So I'm going to give you the one key. We're used to telling people what we think. What we should be telling people is what we saw, what we heard, and how we felt. Right? You're in a meeting. One of the players interrupts in the middle of it. Right? You think they're rude. You think they're inconsiderate. You think they're not being a team player. Right? You feed any of that back to them, you're going to get a change in behavior? No. You're feeding back your evaluation. You know what they need to hear? Your observation. You interrupted Bob 3 times during his presentation. And I must admit, I felt frustrated by it. That's it. A lot more effective. A lot more effective. What did you see? What did you hear? How did it make you feel? I felt frustrated by it. Not everybody was upset. No, that's an evaluation. That's me deciding how other people are. Maybe they weren't all upset. But I can talk about the impact on me. That's for sure. So learning good communication skills. That's not what we're doing here today, so I'm going to move on. But we could spend a lot of time there. So let's start with manage yourself. I love the quote from John Wooden, manage yourself so others won't have to. Why is this important as a coach? Because people cannot move to high performance if they have to spend an inordinately large amount of time managing you. You know, like how can people move to high performance when they're constantly adjusting to you and adapting to you? One day you come in, you're in a good mood. Another day you're not in a good mood. I mean, they're constantly making adjustments, right? And if I'm only 80% focused on the task and 20% trying to deal with you, I'm not moving to high performance. And good coaches have to manage themselves, be very predictable and manage themselves. Okay? And the really good coaches I have worked with, I'm working with Nick Nurse right now because I work with our national men's basketball team. So I spent 6 weeks with him in Australia and China last fall when we were at the World Basketball Championships. You know, he'll come in, we'll be in the coach's room. He'll be upset with Corey Joseph about something or other. He'll be this, he'll be that. Not when he gets in the room. When he gets in the room with the players, they don't have to spend any time adapting or adjusting to him. It's not that you don't get upset and things. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying you really got to learn to manage yourself so that people don't have to spend a lot of time adapting and adjusting. Right? And that's a big one. That's a big one. And so how do you go about doing that? Well, first of all, understand the impact you have on other people. One of our gold medal synchronized swimming coaches many years ago, Debbie Muir, said that about every few weeks she would ask her athletes, what am I doing that drives you crazy? What am I doing that really bothers you or upsets you? You know, or it might be a different question. It might be, how might we organize these practices so it better meets what would better help you? I'll tell you, years ago, I remember working with a world junior hockey team with Hockey Canada. I've been with Hockey Canada for a very long time, still with them. I did this exact session for all the men who will coach on the men's side of the program in the coming year, from World Juniors down to under 17s and under 18s. This is the exact same slide pack, as a matter of fact. And I was telling them, you know, how when we first came in, when I first came into the program, they put up the practice schedule would be like the biggest secret ever kept from the athletes. Like, the athletes had no idea what is going to take place in this practice. And I convinced them that they had to put the practice plans on the board, like on the board. Just put it right up where everybody can see. We're doing this drill, and we're doing this drill, and we're doing this. We have a scrimmage at the end, etc. Because how can people commit to really engage fully in their first thing down the hill if they have no idea what's coming later that day? You know, if someone asks you to go for a run, I think you want to know whether it's a marathon or is it a 3K run at the start, so you know how much energy you can expend. Right? And so, yeah, like, be aware of the impact that what you're doing and you have on other people, right? Know what you believe. Because what you believe can really get in the way sometimes. Like, you might go to any number of these seminars, and other speakers may also say, you know, involve the performer, ask questions, give them some ownership and responsibility here. And you may intellectually think that is a really good idea. But when you're under pressure and push comes to shove, if way down deep you believe, you know what, the only way anything ever gets done properly is if I do it myself, guess what's going to happen? Well, just this once. Like, I can't involve them right now because we don't have the time. Belief gets in the way. And of course, take conscious action to manage yourself. And that involves learning things about resiliency. Learn a good breathing technique, so you can manage your arousal level. It's a lifetime skill. It's a valuable skill. One of the first things I teach athletes, how to breathe, right? Get good at reframing, etc. But get those self-management skills in so you can manage yourself so others won't have to. And so here's an example of some of the things you need to know about yourself. Let's suppose I said to you, fill out this chart based on you. What are you like? You know, do you tend to take control, or do you give up control? Do you speed things up? You slow them down? Do you seek others out, or do you want to be by yourself, etc. Right? And so if I went through on this, I'd be like at least a 3 on take control. I'd be a 2 on speed things up. I'd be a 4 on I'd be a 6 on seek others, because I tend to not ask for help as much as I should. I'm getting a lot better at it. Yes, I express my thoughts. I'd be in a 1 or a 2, as you can well imagine there. And I tend to be more optimistic. Okay, that's me, see? So let's suppose I'm a ski coach and I got a young person coming in, and she's going to be an assistant coach. She's learning to coach. She's just coming into it. And so if I stop and say, okay, we got to come up with her development plan. We got to come up with her development plan, right? And intellectually, what do I know? I know, you know what? If I involve her in the plan, there will be a lot more commitment to the plan than if I dictate the plan. So I want to involve her. All right? I'm going to involve her. Okay? Now I look at this chart again. I say, okay, where do I need to be on this chart in order to be able to do a really good job of involving her? Oh my God. I'm normally a 3 in take control. I got to be over there at an 8. I got to give up control. I got to slow things down. I got to ask more questions. I got to continue to be optimistic so I can be myself there. But the truth is, if I go in as myself, my usual everyday self, I'm not going to be as good a coach as if I modify myself. If I go in with what's needed as opposed to the way I am. And I call this acting abnormal, you know? And to me, winning is not normal. Winning is abnormal. And so I'm constantly telling athletes that you cannot act normally and be successful. When you're trying to do something abnormal, you have to act abnormal. Yes, your legs are tired. Yes, this, yes, that, but still we need to do more of these. Normally, yeah, take a break. Not now, not now. And so as a coach, I also need to act abnormal. Yeah. Well, one of the things when I started working with Nick was first week, I did nothing. And I thought, okay, what am I doing over here in August when I could be at my cottage? Here I am in Australia with the basketball team. And Nick has been great. I go to all the coaches' meetings. I have full access to him. He and I eat together. We've had a good time together, but I haven't done anything. So finally at breakfast, I asked to meet with him at breakfast. So we got down and I said to him, Nick, I need to be more engaged. He said, what do you mean? What would you normally do? I said, well, I've been with the team for the last 2 years, and I was with the women's team before then. I do sessions for the players. I do this, I do that. We sit down as coaches. I talk about some of the coaching thing they can do. And he was so honest. And he looked at me and he said, Peter, I've never turned my team over to anybody else. And I'd be a little concerned that your message and my message might be different. And I said, well, you've read Ignite the Third Factor, the book I gave you. I saw you reading it on the airplane. So you know philosophically, you and I are on the same page. Secondly, I'm listening very carefully in these coaches' meetings, and I'm going to put what you say just into my own words, but I'm going to be saying the same thing. And he said, okay, I want to think about that. I said, yeah, but let's keep this front center. Because I got to figure out my role here, and I need a much bigger role than I have right now. Not for my sake, but I think there's things I can bring. And so as he was leaving, I said to him, you know, Nick, you did that session with the players yesterday afternoon where you asked them why it took so long for the three-point shot to get integrated into coaches' plans when it's been a rule and been on the books for 20 some odd years. And I said, you had a really nice answer. You know, the players gave all kinds of possible answers. And Nick finally said to the players, no, actually it's coaches. Coaches were stuck in the way that they were used to doing things. And they hadn't done all the math on it to figure out if you shoot 35% from three, it's way better than shooting 40% from two in terms of the actual points and blah, blah, blah. They hadn't done all that stuff. They hadn't worked it all out to where they believed it yet. And I looked at him and I said, Nick, this might be one of those times, you know. And he laughed because he's a great guy. And, you know, the next day he said, you ready? Yeah. I want you to do a session with the players. So I gone back up to my room and I said to myself, you know, I'm asking him to change. I got to change. I got to be willing to change too. And so he said, how much time do you need? I said, 3 to 5 minutes. That's all. I said, that's all. Just 3 to 5 minutes. I decided I was going to do what I call dripping it in. I'm going to bring a little thing in and let it leave there for a while. And then I'll do another little thing as opposed to a long session. The athletes prefer that anyway. And the next day he forgot that I was doing that. And the practice was over and he came up to me and he said, oh my God, I meant to call you in and I forgot when we were in the circle at the end of practice. I said, don't worry about it. I'll do it on the bus. He said, you do it on the bus? I said, I'll do it on the bus. We got a half-hour bus ride. I'll just get on the bus. And so he got up on the bus and told him to pay attention. I did my 5 minutes right on the bus as we were traveling back to our hotel in Australia. But the point being, you know, you have to modify who you are. And he did. And from that point on, we did all kinds of things. Now we stay in touch all the time. And so sometimes it's not who you are, but it's what's needed. It's what needed. I mean, most of the time you're going to be yourself, right? Okay. Oh, let's not go there. Let's talk about building trust. And trust is a big one. Um, Here's how you get trust. You be the first to extend it. And you're the coach. You're the coach. See, when Debbie Muir says to her athletes, what's the one thing that I do that drives you crazy? Oh my goodness. Does that build trust with her athletes? By all means. I remember one time she said to the athletes, I don't know about you, but all these television cameras coming into the pool where we've had nobody for 3 years and 10 months between Olympics, and now they realize that we got a medal, 2 gold medal hopefuls in here. Now the cameras are everywhere. That's making me a little nervous. What about you? You know, be the first to extend trust. You know, then you're trustworthy. So you trust first. You operate on the assumption that they're going to perform, they're going to be to their best. And then when they don't prove that, then you start to do things. Involve the performer. My first World Junior Hockey team, Don Hay was the head coach, and he got in touch with me quite frequently before the tournament. We'd been together in the summer at a camp with the players, 50 of the players we thought might make the World Junior team. It's been held in Edmonton and Calgary at the time. And Don kept asking me questions about, what are we going to do about cell phones? What are we going to do about this? What about that? Finally, I said to Don, because Don was he was in his 60s at the time, and I was approaching 70. And I said to him, you know, given the fact that I'm 68 and you're 61, you and I are not going to come up with a good cell phone policy. You know? And I said to him, just leave it be. We'll let the players do this. He went, really? I said, yeah, we're going to let the players do this. So we picked the team. We were training in Calgary. We picked the team. We headed to Banff. We stayed at the Banff Springs Hotel before Christmas, the tournament, you know, when the tournament runs. And first session, first evening, okay? So I divide the team into 3 groups. I give one group the challenge of coming up with our social media policy. You come up with a social media policy. I give a third of the players, what are you going to do about family and friends? Because they have a huge influence on players. Family and friends, now that you've made this team, there needs to be a little bit of a boundary around this team. Not for the wrong reasons, for the right reasons. And the only people who really know what's going on inside this team are people inside that boundary. We know best what's going on. And, you know, you're going to get an email from somebody who you play hockey with on a junior team somewhere in Canada when they find out you're not on the power play, and they're going to be texting you and sending you a message about, I can't believe you're not on the power play. Don't they know how good you are? Why they got so-and-so on that, etc. Is that helpful to you? As you're trying to be a member of this team and engage and be totally involved in the team. No? The actual, when they did that session, the players actually came up with, they wanted me to do a session with their parents, the coach and I. And Don and I went out and actually did a session with the parents, talking about helpfulness and how could they be, you know. And the third group, I had them come up with the rules of the pool. You know, when you go to a swimming pool, there are rules. No running on the pool deck, no horseplay, no diving in the shallow. What's our rules? What time are we in our room? What time are lights out, etc. And you know, Don and I were having dinner together in Vancouver about 6 months after the tournament. And he said to me, you know, we never had any issues with all the rules, social media, any of that stuff. I said, no, because we didn't own it. It wasn't ours, it was there. I had warned Don ahead of time. I said, they're going to come up with things that are too tight. Like you're going to have to loosen things off a bit because they've just made the team and they're all excited and they got a 5-foot flame going out their back end. So, you know, they're going to establish a bedtime that's probably unreasonable, especially seen as New Year's Eve and things like that fall in there. Until they did, but that's fine. Don could lighten up on their established guidelines, etc. And the biggest thing about trust is this. Sometimes people think trust is likability, that you will trust people because you like them. I have people I like immensely, but I do not trust them. I do not trust they'll have their work done on time. I don't trust they'll show up on time, etc. Right? See, trust is about competence. Competence. they need to know that you know what the hell you're doing. And a big part of that is that you understand progression, that you're not asking them to do things that they're not ready to do yet. Okay? Now, they ought to be near the edge of what they're ready to do. And we'll talk about that when we get to adversity. We're going to talk about training zone versus the high risk zone, etc. So we'll come back to that because I've already said emotion is really important for development. And so you're going to put them in positions where they might skin their knee, metaphorically, but you ought not to put them in a position where they're going to break a leg. And so they need to know that you know what you're doing. You know, someone suddenly walked into the room. Let's say we were doing this live and someone walked into the room and they were a gymnastics coach and they said, we're going to do a slight warm up here before this session. We're all going to do front handsprings. You don't trust that person because they have no idea where you're at. I mean, you and I are at log rolls, at best a front somersault, right? So let's move on. Let's talk about imagery. How did I go so quickly? Just a minute here. I thought I had a really nice build on this slide. I mean, there we go. Use and encourage imagery. Imagery enhances clarity. You got to be able to paint really clear pictures of what constitutes a good performance. Okay. Oh, sorry, wrong way. Okay. It impacts your message, and images really increase the likelihood of success as a leader. So I want to talk about these. What is an image? It's an internal experience that includes images, smells, sounds, movements, and sensations. Why am I telling you this? Because too many people use the word visualization. Visualization implies that it's visual, right? In many people, I worked with 2 world champions, no pictures in their imagery. No pictures in their imagery, right? The fact of the matter is, it's the way that each individual combines their senses. And that's why we call it imagery. Why is it powerful? Because it goes in at the mind, the body, and the feeling levels simultaneously. It is by far the most powerful language that we know. And it's the oldest language. Long before your body could speak, it had imagery. Yo-Yo Ma, the concert cellist, calls imagery the forgotten language of our youth. Little kids don't distinguish between the imaginary world and the real world. But stop and think about those people who most want to influence you in this world. You know what we call them? Do you know what we call them? We call them advertisers. We call them advertisers. What language do they speak to you in? Oh, they're trying to get you to imagine driving that car or tasting that pizza in full detail. And heck, when they get to the point where they can put the smell of the new automobile out the front of your television set, you're one step closer to that car, not to mention what it's going to do for the pizza manufacturers. So what do you need to paint? Paint clear pictures. People need to get the picture in their head that you have in your head with the words. You got to get this done quicker. Doesn't teach anybody anything. Right? Imagine a golf pro standing behind you yelling, hit it further, or straighten it out when you slice it. Not very helpful. Right? It's clear pictures of what constitutes a good performance. In golf, it's the grip, it's the stance, it's the takeaway, it's all of those kinds of things. And obviously in skiing, it's many other things. You know, I'm old enough to remember an interview I heard many years ago when sports psychology was not a field where we were just developing it. And I was in on the ground floor of a lot of that stuff. I remember hearing an interview with Ingmar Stenmark. I usually have to stop and explain who he is, but I don't think so now. I think even younger people know that he still holds the record for World Cup medals, etc. Great slalom skier. And late in his career, he would only train with 2 gates, often, especially on race day, just train with 2 gates. And they interviewed him. And I remember the interview so well. And they said, how come you only train with 2 gates? And he looked at the reporter and he said, there's a left turn and there's a right turn. The rest I can do in my head. So true. So true, because he had all the content he needed, right? Wasn't hard for him to do imagery. He knew what it felt like. He knew what it sounded like. It was all there. Didn't mean, obviously, he didn't do full runs. It was training. What it says was certain times, that's all he needed. That's all he needed. Create a line of sight. help people see what they're doing in this moment is connected to where we're going. Now, I was working with a decathlete, and oh no, sorry. Well, I was working with decathletes and heptathletes, but the story is about a heptathlete. And she was as fast as anybody in the world from 50 meters to 100 meters in the 100-meter dash, but she wasn't quick enough in the first 100 meters. So the strength coach was putting her on a strength training program, and I had asked to be involved in the session because the strength coach had the personality of a pomegranate, like, oh my God, like it just was flat. And so he explained to her all these exercises she had to do in these awkward positions. And she looked at him. She was a mature athlete. She was a seasoned performer. And she said to him, and why am I doing this? And he said, well, because I'm the strength coach and I know what it takes to improve this. And I said at that moment, I'd like to put that a little different way. And I said to her, you know what we're working on? We're working on the first 50 meters of the 100-meter dash. And she said, yes. I said, well, the first exercise is designed to put your body in a lower position and to fire off these muscle groups in this way that will allow you to be here at 20 meters, here at 50 meters, on the podium at Canadians, and to go to the Olympics in Tokyo in 2020. That was a bit of a lie, wasn't it? Go to the Olympics in 2020. You think she's more committed back there in the weight room now? She has a line of sight. She has a line of sight from why we're doing this thing to where we're going and how we're going to get there, right? And encourage athletes to translate. When I talk to the athletes on November 18th, one of the things I'm going to encourage them to do is when they get instruction, translate that instruction for their body. When someone says to them, I want you to be I want you to take a much tighter line through the second turn, I want them to go inside and I want them to do that before they have to do it. Get a rep in before you have to get another rep in, right? And because too many times they're just, oh yeah, and away they go. Well, there's been your body doesn't speak English or French. Your body speaks image, right? And that's factual. That's not some lighthearted thing. I mean, you get up and walk out of a room. How do you do it? You run imagery. It controls the timing and sequence of all of your movement patterns, right? It's not some light, fluffy thing here. Right? It's very real. And so being able to put things in pictures, sometimes metaphors are so helpful. And the really good coaches are very, very good at doing that. They spend a lot of time. One of the coaches I work with would talk about swimming coach, talk about going to the pool and going over the practice plan in their head as they went to the pool. And I'm going to say this. And then sort of imagine themselves as a swimmer and hearing that. And would they imagine what that coach was imagining them doing? And sometimes the coach would go, oh my gosh, they're not going to see it that way. They're going to see it this way, right? And as that coach said to me, which I thought was one of the wisest things I've ever heard, he said to me, the meaning of the communication is the response you get. You thought you painted a picture of everybody go left, but some of them went right. Well then, whose issue is that? It's not their issue. Right? You think you're clear, but you're not clear. And it's something worth working on. So you take a concept like teamwork. Well, what would you see? And for some people, it means let's go out for a beer. No more working from home. It breaks down into all kinds of other things, right? And so you say, well, what would you see and what would you hear? And imagery not only provides clarity, but it provides motivation. When they get a clear image of the future, oh my God, it's really, really motivating. You know, I mentioned this when I spoke, but this is Cotter's work on change at Harvard. You know, you think people analyze and think and then they act and that's how they change. That's not the way they change. They see, they feel, and they act. That's the important part. So create a line of sight. Commitment rises in people who can see direct connection. I don't know who said that. Encourage them to translate and let's talk about blocks, because the block is often in the imagination. They can't imagine self doing that. You ever been talking to someone, you see certain capabilities in them, and you say to them, well, why don't you do that? Or why don't you apply to take that role on? And what do they say to you? They say some version of this. Oh, I can't see myself doing that, or I can't imagine myself doing that. That's right. See, that's what's blocking them. And then you start to build a little bit of a staircase. Well, could you see yourself doing this? And then once they're there, could you see yourself doing this? And what about this then? If we move to here, and pretty soon they can imagine it. Because very often they just can't see it. Okay? Or feel it, or taste it, or smell it, all the senses. And so let's talk about blocks. It says debrief every performance. What a ridiculous thing to say. But debrief performances frequently. Debrief performances frequently. So here's the problem. If you do not debrief the good performances, you are in no position to do a really good job of debriefing the bad performances. Why is that? Well, first of all, let's realize this. When someone's blocked, someone's not moving, not progressing, where is the data that you need to coach? Where's the data? It's inside the other person. You don't have it yet. And guess what? Many times they don't have it. They're unaware, right? And so when you debrief good performances, and so they get familiar with questions like this. What were you thinking about as you headed into that run? Any images come to you before that last turn? Right? What was your arousal level before you started? How confident were you that you could do well on that run? Right? When you start to ask a few of these questions, you normalize that process. You see? So when they ask you, they run well, and you ask them those questions. Oh yeah, I did this, I did that. Now when they don't do well and you ask those questions, they're just normal questions. But if you only ask them when people fail, it's like you're calling them a choker, or you're questioning their very foundation. And so you want to normalize those questions when you debrief, right? And what are you going to do? You're going to ask really good questions, and you're going to listen. Right? Really good questions. See, here's what happens when you ask a really good question. It focuses their attention. And you know what they may say to you? I don't know. I don't know. Then you ask another question. Well, if you did know, what would the answer be? And sometimes that gives you more information again. They go, oh, I had that happen many, many times. That's a Susan Scott question, by the way. Yeah. But the fact of the matter is, you want to get really good at asking really good questions. Good questions are worth their weight in gold. When I'm working with hockey coaches at Hockey Canada, it's unbelievable. Like they love when we start talking about questions, because they write them down. Oh, that's a really good one. I really like that one. I'll get really good data with that one. Okay, like they love the fact that before a game, I'll walk around to the players when they're on the bikes and ask them that question about one thing. What's the one thing you did it different and better? Because you know what? It gives me a reason to talk to them after the game, or in your instance, after the run. Now, did you do that? How effective did you think you were? I said, now we're developing, and we're building self-awareness and self-responsibility. What would you do differently next time? Right? And of course, you're going to listen to it. I'm cognizant of time, so I'm going to move on. This is the quote I used at the opening, right? I would say, let's talk about adversity. It's a great quote from, unfortunately, the late coach Andy Higgins, University of Toronto track and field coach. No one is going to become excellent, competent, or achieve mastery without consciously seeking to push the boundaries. As you cannot push boundaries without running into adversity and having disappointments, the only way to move beyond them is to accept them for what they are. Lessons that will give us what we need to take us to the next level. If we were capable of going to the next level, we wouldn't have the disappointment, setback, whatever. And that's where I start. That's where I start with the athletes. I start by saying when they've had a disappointment or failure or setback, you know, this is just information. Like if you were ready to go to the next level, you'd be there. But there's something you need to start doing or stop doing or learn or develop or change or modify or let go of in order to get to the next level. Okay? And that's what we need to learn. That's where we need to work. Okay? And so one of the things you want to do is reframe it as soon as possible. Help them see the opportunity in this. And that's where you might do the kind of thing I talked about at the beginning. How will you feel about this? Next race, if it's still, you still got the same issue going on. Okay? Oh, I'm going to be so frustrated. Yeah. So what's the opportunity here? What are we going to work on? Let's figure out what to work on, you know, and see it as an opportunity. Okay? And obviously you lay the groundwork because it's not going to go 100% of the time every time. You lay the groundwork. Now, you're doing something new for the first time, right? And so, but I admire you that you're here to learn something. Sometimes with athletes, especially early in the year, I talk to them about, we're just going to school here. Like you might win this race at Caledon here this week, and you're going to feel really good about yourself. But if you can't tell me why you won the race, what was going through all of those kinds of things, then how's that going to help you moving on? So if you succeed, we need to increase your level of self-awareness, or if you fail, we need to increase your level of self-awareness. But we're just going to school now. And so, yeah, you're going to try something new. So your performance may not be what it has been, but we're trying to correct something. And sometimes you'll take a little step backwards to go forward. That's okay. And they agree to that. And then after the race, you go, oh, that was no good. Wait a minute. What did we have you focused on? We had you focused on this technically. I saw an improvement in that. Are you faster with it yet? No, no. But you're up a bit. The technique is better. We're not going to go back to the way you used to be because that has a limited horizon, ceiling on it. That's got a ceiling on it, wrong word, ceiling, right? And of course, you're going to create adversity to test people's resiliency. You set up little challenges and things like that because you got to see how they perform in those situations, in those environments. And so, you know, I promise this, you know, you're trying to move them out of their comfort into the learning zone, but you don't want to move them into the panic zone, right? I was working with rowing coaches one year, and it was a really great group to work with. And one of the guys who coached at a younger level said to me, you drive to Queens quite a bit because you teach at Queens. I said, yeah, I teach in the executive programs there, but not frequently. I'm only down there 5-6 times a year. And he said, well, you know, I'm in Picton. Like, would you come by and drop in one time on your way by? And I said, sure, I'll drop in on your way by. And it was early in the season. The young rowers had just all got together and everything. And he said to me, oh, I'm glad you're here. He said, I'm going to do this exercise today and I want to get your feedback on it. You know? So the young rowers, because this is new to them. I mean, they're like all excited. They can hardly wait to get on the water and get in the scull and not realizing that they're all going to be in the water because that's a hell of a hard thing to balance, especially with more than 2 people in it. And he says, no, come this way. And there, he's an old coach. He's been around for a while. And they look at him and they go, Coach, the water's over here. He said, no, I know the water's over there, but we're going out here. And he's got a little bit of a woods near there, a little with some fruit trees and things, and some trees that are pretty easy to climb. And so he says to the kids, he says, everybody find a tree. So everybody finds a tree. And then he says to them, okay, now listen to my instructions very carefully. Okay, I want you to climb that tree as high up in that tree as you can. And when you've got as far as you can go in that tree, here's what I'd like you to do. I want you to call me. All right. And it was about 6 athletes, maybe 8, I guess 8, because you're going to do an 8. So they all got up in the trees, and then you'd hear them call them. coach, coach. And he'd walk to the bottom of the tree and he'd say, all right, Sarah, is that as high as you can go? And she says, yes, coach, it is. And then he'd say, okay, Sarah, you see that branch that's just by your left knee there? Yes, coach. I want you to go up onto that branch, and then I want you to come right down the tree. Would you do that, please? Yes, coach. And I said to him afterwards, that's brilliant. Like, that's absolutely brilliant. Like, you let them tell you how far they would go up in that tree. What was their comfort level? But then you asked them to do a little more. But they knew that's all the extra. You didn't say go to the top of the tree. You asked them to go up one more branch and come down. And that's the kind of expertise our people expect us to have. You know, that you're willing to stretch them a little bit, but you're not asking them to do things they don't feel comfortable doing. So that's it for slides. Mercifully, let me stop sharing and let me see if any of you out there have any questions, or Robin, have people sent questions into you? Is there anything, any curiosities that we could answer? Any comments?
Thanks for that, Peter. I've just dropped that into the chat to get everyone to send in some questions. I'm sure there's going to be a few. But yeah, if anyone has any questions for Peter, they can pop their hand up or unmute. Tanis. Go ahead, Tanis.
Hi, my name's Tanis. Thank you so much. That is so insightful. I have a question for you about fear.
Yeah.
Because fear it's primal, but it's also an emotion. We have fear of failure, but we also have fear of hitting the slalom gates. And we see an athlete that can do stubbies perfectly well. And the minute we put those big slalom gates up in front of them, their line changes, and then you'll even have a stubby gate that goes right into a normal slalom. How do you deal with that emotion and fear? And
well, you deal with it as a progression, first of all, but let me back up for a minute. One of the things I constantly tell the athletes about fear is that there can be no courage without fear. Like, courage only exists because fear exists, right? I mean, people who do things they don't feel afraid, well, you can't say they're courageous. You're only courageous if fear exists. So from that backdrop, we start to talk about, well, what would it take? You know, what would it take? And sometimes it might literally be seeing that, oh my gosh, it's really not a lot. It looks like a big thing, but it's not a big thing. You know, it's funny because I've been thinking about the session I was going to do with the athletes on the 18th. And this morning in my workout, I had music on, and I use Spotify. So I was into music that is current, because I don't like to get caught back in my time zone. And a song came on, and I noted the name of the song on my thing, because I'm going to use it when I'm talking to the athletes, because it's their vintage, it's their music, it's their. Let me find the name of the song. I know I'm all over the place, but that's all right. It's Okay Not to Be Okay by Marshmello or something like that. But the words were great. Like, the words were about, it's not a big thing. It looks like a big thing, but it's not a big thing. We think it's the end of the world, but it's not. And that's, see, another thing I do with people is I try to give them things that they can do attentionally that will help them with that. And so if you take something like, let's use your exact example, the slalom course, okay? And so now it's gone from stubbies to gates, all right? And so the first thing I want athletes to understand is that the voice in their head is always going to make up stories. Like, that's what the voice in your head does. That's what minds do. And I know this sounds really esoteric here, but I give them the experience of realizing they're not their mind. And it's not hard to do. I mean, I have them sit down, I say, look at what you're thinking and jot that down. Now, what's going on in your body level? right? And what feelings are you having right now? Even if you can't label them, right? And then I say to them, who's seeing that? Who's watching that? Well, that's the self, you see? And the great thing about us as human beings is that we have this capacity to be aware, right? We can notice. Like snakes just go with their wiring. They're reactive, right? And we don't want to get reactive. We want to respond. We're at least human. We're afraid when we do this, but we want to respond. Okay? And so the things that I start to teach them about the mind have to do with the voice in your head. It's not factual. Just because you think it doesn't mean it's true. Oh, my best friend's upset with me. That's why she's not calling. And then I find out she had a dentist appointment. But I've made up this whole story about, you know, why I haven't heard from her, and it's just not true, right? And so this is why I start with breathing. I start with breathing because, first of all, your attention can only be one place at a time, not two places. That's why multitasking doesn't work, okay? The minute the attention is focused on one thing, it can't be focused on something else. So the minute it's focused on your voice in your head, or you're concerned about this, you can't be focused on your life or things like that. And so I teach them how to breathe, because the minute you go to the breath, all of that other nonsense shuts down. And you just focus on the breath, one or two times, right? One or two breaths. And so I would do things in the gait that they would do ahead of time that would better help their run, and things through the run. Now, when I work with pro golfers, for example, they can get in their head big time, especially late round. I have them whistle, I have them hum to themselves, I have them sing a song to themselves. like no one knows you're doing it, right? You're just doing it internally. But it, like, what is the rhythm about this? Might not even be a song. It might be boom, ba-boom, ba-boom, boom, boom. You know, what is it? All right. But I want attentional cues that keep the attention where it's needed, that help the performance. And so with figure skaters, for example, I'd have them draw out their program on the ice, and I'd have them write out the attentional cues that they were going to use to be able to complete their performance, right? And sometimes it might be an image, and sometimes it might be a word or two: rip, blast, drive. You know, but it starts early. Like I've spent a fair bit of time with Steve Podborski, and one of the things that he learned when he was injured and missed the Olympic Games, his first Olympics, because he was injured. And that's a very funny story if you haven't heard him tell it, because his parents end up going to the Olympics and he ends up staying in his house in Don Mills because they already bought tickets and everything. He's home alone. But he did a lot of thinking, recovering from the injury he had at Pittsfield. And so he became very aware of arousal level. And what was his arousal level? And so when he was going up the toe, he would go inside and he'd say, "Where am I at right now?" And he knew, and it changed with courses, different courses, he'd had different levels, but generally his arousal level for him was somewhere between a 7.5 and an 8, depending on the course that he was going to run. But see, he was so familiar with that, he could raise it or lower it, take it up or down, put himself to where he had to be, and then at the last minute, because it wants to go up in the gate, bring your arousal level down so you can perform well. Elvis Stoico was the same thing. I worked with Elvis Stoico for years. You know, he's out in the middle of the ice all by himself, surrounded by spectators, waiting for his music to come on. Well, what are you going to do that's functional? Breathe. And so he'd lower his arousal level a little bit, because he knew when the music come on, he's going to do this. And so little things like that. I know I'm all over the place, tennis, because it's a big question. It's all of sports psychology. But first of all, I'd want to know what they're imagining or what they're saying to themselves that causes that track, and then try to get some things in line with. But see, that's a good example of what's in the way. You can do all the work you want, but that's going to be in the way until we deal with it. And it might be, you know, you put up things that look less solid for a while, and then you gradually move to the And then maybe they learn to see them as advantage. I'm going to lean into this because it's not going to hurt me, but that's the cue. Hit this shoulder, hit it on the stake, etc.
Perfect.
Was
Thank
I
you.
vague enough?
It's clear as mud. No, that helps.
Thank you.
Jacques, did you want to ask your question?
Sure, thank you. Peter, amazing presentation. I'm so glad you referenced Andy Higgins. I had a chance to spend some time with him through the NCI in Toronto, and he was an inspirational person. So it was great to see his words there. My question revolves around imagery, and obviously you have a lot to talk about with that. In skiing and in sport, especially with our coaching education, we talk about external focus of attention. And I know your imagery is about inner and all that kind of stuff. In order to get somebody to change in their movements, we do talk a lot about external cues and external focus of attention. Just wondering if you had the chance to work with that and maybe talk about that.
Well, yeah, I mean, obviously, when you're competing, you don't want to be going inside. Only bad things are going to happen. I mean, you want your attention outside. I tell hockey players that all the time. You get on the bench, by all means, go inside, run the correction for the mistake you made on the last shift, if that's what's bothering you, but then get the hell out here with the rest of us. Because nothing's good going to happen if you're sitting there and chewing up things, right? No, I would, like, first of all, I would say that most of the time it's a series of internal and external cues, because you're looking for a certain feeling in a turn. You're looking for a certain, and so you're here and then you're out here and then you're checking your line, then you're going back. And so, but again, it's a script. And I think that you want to write a really good script for yourself. And you want to find words that keep your attention focused where you need it. But here's the key. You got to change the words. Like, you cannot run 2 months from now with the same words you're running from now, because they get stale and they don't hold your attention. Right? And you want to have some words that are mood words that bring energy and enthusiasm and emotion to them. So that's why I use a word like blast or rip, as opposed to turn, right? I want words that have vitality to them and that sort of thing. But I think you've got to modify your script fairly frequently. And the reason that external is really good, when you're rehearsing, like day before a race, day of a race, and you run through in your head, you go through it all. I still like the athlete standing and moving. Like, I'm not a big lie down and do this imagery thing. That's great for relaxation, getting relaxed and then doing the imagery, but especially prior to performing, I prefer them upright and moving and going through it, because I think it's a better way to do it. I know that with swimmers, we discovered if you film them in the ready room, where they all have to be with their competitors, the ones that are sitting with a towel over their head don't perform nearly as well as the ones that are up and moving around.
Awesome, thank you, Peter. And I was reading recently about, good coaches are good storytellers, and I have to say you're an amazing storyteller. Love listening to your stories, so thank you again very much.
Thank you. Well, Jacques, stories is just an image.
Yeah.
It's a better way to paint the picture. You'll remember, Debbie Muir asked this question, or Nick Nurse did this, rather than the concept.
Thank you.
Kip's trying to pretend he's in the mountains. He's in his garage. He's been thrown out of his house. I saw it before he put the background on.
Really poorly lit mountains.
Yeah, might not be wisest to get out there and go full bore today, Kip. Yeah.
Peter, I've got a question from Graham. Do you have any suggestions for high achievers at early ages? strategies for managing goals and expectations. So high achievers at early ages.
Yeah, I think, first of all, you want to get them, especially if they're always being successful, you want to get them on broad. When you can't take what they're doing deeper, take it wider. And so, like, start to introduce them to some of the sports psych stuff, you know, things that will eventually benefit them down the road, and put them in challenging situations that test them. Like, they need that a lot. But I'm also cognizant of the fact that they need some adversity. Like, they need some adversity. They need challenging things that they can't do yet. You know, one of the things, studies that was done now, it was probably 20 years ago now, but they looked at age group champions in swimming. And what they found out that very few age group champions ever made the national swim team. And the reason is that swimming had 2-year stratas, right? Like 8 and 9-year-olds, 9 and 10, or whatever it goes, right? And so, you know, you're number 1 in the country 1 year, and the next year you're 286th. And they couldn't deal with that. Like, they couldn't deal with that. And so I think that they need to be tested at the appropriate level so their motivation stays high. And they need to learn to deal with some adversity, because you know what? They're going to get it. And they shouldn't get it the first time they appear at an important games. We owe it to them to test them and challenge them. Again, you know, not ridiculously so, but, and it might be in other areas, you know.
Does anybody else have anything, or can I ask another question again? It might piggyback on the Graham's.
Go ahead, Dan.
Go for it.
Not just about early, what did he call it, or high achievers at an early age. What about people, we talked about nature versus nurture, and then that third factor, people who just are athletically gifted and do really, really well without having to try that hard. And that there's no one there to push them. There's no carrot in front of them to catch. So you've got this, you know, on every team, there's that one kid that is just super good. How do you get them? And you know, in your head, you could be even better. And how do you light that desire? They don't need to, they're already winning. How do you light that even more? Well,
I spent some time with Bob Bowman, who coached Michael Phelps. He was fairly gifted. And one of the things that they did was, and they had times to work from, right? But like, once they broke a certain time that was a stretch goal, Bowman would say, okay, we've got to break, between now and the Olympics, we have to break that time 50. We're going to break it 50 times for that. And one of the great things in this era is you can get time. I don't know what it's like in skiing, so I'm very ignorant in that. But like, for example, there is a hill on a road near my cottage. And when my daughter-in-law goes out to run, she knows that someone else ran that hill the other day 4 seconds faster than she runs that damn hill. And when she goes out there, it will work like hell to beat that 4 seconds. And so I don't know if there's certain, I know that the gates move around and things like that, so it's hard to do. But if you have certain carrots out there, certain times, and then work towards that, because that's the ceiling. Like, there's no downside to setting high expectations. Not off the lip, but say, you know what? I see this, I see this, I see this. You can gain a half second here, you can gain this, you're good. You can't be satisfied with that. Yeah, but this isn't the pool. You're in a small pool right now. Or try to get them to go up an age group, or push them to move, you know, take them somewhere where there's going to be someone who's going to challenge them and kick their butt. So they, again, you know, but you got to think out of the box with a lot of that stuff, because it is hard without that other, I mean, trying to catch someone is a lot easier than being out in front, right? Staying out in front is challenging. So you have to have other things that keep you there. And that happens all the time. But I know when figure skaters at the cricket club, for example, one of the great things about the cricket club as a figure skating club is they got the Japanese champion, and so you're still okay as a Canadian because you're competing to win the Canadian championship, but you got all these people who are doing things better than you do them, and it's very motivational. It's very motivational. So, I mean, what do we do in women's hockey? We cross-train, we actually play our biggest competitor 6-7 times a year. People think, well, that's crazy. Why are you showing the Americans everything you do? It's the only way we're going to get better. And so they've just set up a series. I noticed the other day, it's Secret Deodorant funded it to $1 million to have the Canada-US series played because they need that. You need that. Otherwise, you think you're doing really well, but you're in a club team. I mean, come on. Nobody's moving as fast as, Marie-Philippe Poulin or, Sarah Nurse. So we set it up, right? So it works. Time for a beer? I think so.
I have a question, Peter.
Go ahead.
Maybe before we let you go, or if there are more questions, and I appreciate you running over with us. And this is, I don't know, maybe this is a little vague, this question, but kids.
No, I can't take you seriously, Kip. It looks like you're wearing a witch's hat.
All right.
There. Okay.
A lot of people don't take me seriously with or without the witch's hat. So I'm just wondering, like, kids, things have changed in the world in the last 20 or 30 years, and kids, how they spend their time has changed. It appears that what motivates them has changed, and I think a lot of us coached the way we were coached, which was very direct, very do as the coach says. The coach is always right. Even if the coach is wrong, the coach is right. That was something that was said to me when I was a kid. And, I think some of us feel sometimes, or at some points we did, that, the kids just aren't what they used to be, but obviously people are running faster, jumping farther, skiing faster than ever. So obviously that's not true. But I'm wondering, have you seen a change in how kids learn or what motivates them, and also how the best coaches, deal with them and speak to them?
Yeah, I mean, there's no question. I mean, every generation is different, right? And different is the key word. It doesn't necessarily mean that they're worse or better. We actually do a program in the workplace called Working with People You Don't Understand, which is a better way of talking about it, And so finding out, well, what motivates them? What would you find invigorating? How do you think we should organize? Once in a blue moon, okay, if you had 10 minutes of this practice to organize, what drill would you do? I always think back to, the guy who was the color commentator, Harry Neal, on Hockey Night in Canada for many, many years, and he was concerned about this same issue 25 years ago when he was coaching the Vancouver Canucks. And so he would turn over a practice to the players for 15 minutes once a week. And what they did, he'd have the players come up with drills that they were going to do. And then he would name the drill after that player. So even when he used the drill, next 2 weeks later in practice, okay, this is Curtis's drill, and they'd work through it that way, and engage them and involve them that way, because like in my field, for example, are these kids gonna look? Here's something that would improve everybody's performance, guaranteed. Meditate an hour in the morning and an hour in the evening. You will become a lot better at focusing your attention. Therefore, you will be a lot better. And truth is, a lot of great athletes did that sort of thing in a different way many, many times, and they still do. But am I going to get junior hockey players to meditate an hour in the morning? No, there's not a chance in hell I'm going to get that. And so what do? I get them on a breathing app. I get them to buy an app. And then when I'm with the young skiers, that's what I'm going to talk to them about. I'm going to talk about, get out your iPhone, and here's an app to download. And it's called Heart Rate with a plus sign on it. All right? Heart rate with a plus sign. And you want the coherency version. And then I'll walk them through it. I'll say, okay, now here's what you do. You put your finger on the camera lens and you see what happened at the top of your screen? Oh, yeah, that's your heart rate. See it going now? That's your heart rate. Good. Now you see those two mountains at the bottom with a little ball moving? Breathe in, hold, breathe out. That's going to teach you to breathe in for 4 seconds and exhale for 6 seconds. Why are we doing that? Well, because biofeedback tells us that moves you into an incredibly relaxed, highly focused state, right? And so it's ideal state. And so you want to get really good at this. It's like reps in the weight room. It's like anything else that you're doing. It's number of times you go down a course, etc. You know, but this is a skill that you're going to have at your beck and call when you need it, if you work on it. And then I'll say to them, and you know what's going to happen when you start to do this? All of a sudden, in the middle of that screen, a little mountain will start to grow. It may grow 10%, and it will say 10%. You're just doing this for 5 minutes. That's all. 5 minutes, right? And it'll store your history. And you know what you're going to notice? In 1 week, you've been able to get that mountain up to 54% as your new high. 2 weeks, oh my gosh, look what I'm doing now. I'm in the 70%. And what are you measuring there? You're measuring a coherency. You're measuring the synchronicity between your heart and your respiration rate, right? And you're moving into that ideal state, and you're getting better and better and better at it. And so, man, they all will do something on their iPhone. It's like a game. It's like a video game that they can do. Much better way to teach it to them. So constantly finding ways to include them and use them, and talk to elementary school teachers. Find out what they're doing to engage students, the really good ones. You know, my granddaughter, one of my granddaughters here in Toronto, I started a brand new school down in Leaside, and her teacher, a young man, has won all kinds of awards in teaching. God, you go to his website, you go, this guy's unbelievable. Look what he's doing with grade 1 students. It's unbelievable what he's managed to engage them in. And they're all shooting for this certain award every week, something Lion. They used to take it home for the weekend if they won it. And they win it but it's all laid out. Yeah, you get creative. You just get really creative. And if you're not an innovative person, get with someone who is. Talk to them. What would you do? How can we do this? This would be neat. You know? I know in sports psychology and basketball, for example, I have a young woman, amazing woman, Anika Green is her name. She lives over in Etobicoke. And I have her working with the younger age groups in basketball. Oh my God. The stuff she comes up with to do sports psych with them that they just love. They get totally engaged with it. Because it's fun.
Terrific, thank you.
The chat is lit up, Peter, with the name of that app you're talking about. It's called Heart Rate Plus Coherency version. Is that right?
That's it. It used to be $4.95. I think it's down to $3 something now. It's only a $10,000 biofeedback machine. That's what it would have cost you 12 years ago. You know, unbelievable.
Times have changed.
It's unbelievable.
Times have changed.
I mean, it's just so good.
To have
Once
that
you get
right in your
good
hand
at
is pretty
bringing
awesome.
your arousal level down with that app, it's a lot easier for you to do it on the hill and other times because it's sort of like, it's like once you learn to hit the golf ball squarely, at least you know what it feels like, you know, to go there. And so you're much quicker to get into that pattern. You actually elicit what's called a relaxation response, which is actually in the primitive brain beside the startle response, the flight or flight response. And Herbert Benson, a Harvard medical doctor, identified it years ago, which is sort of ironic because, you know, we looked the world over for peace and tranquility, and it's right here. We already bought the program. We just don't know how to use it. We can't trigger it.
We need our little handy iPhone in our hands to help us. Tanis was asking too if there's a breathing app you'd recommend. Is there a specific breathing app you'd recommend, Peter?
Breathing?
Breathing app on a phone. Is there a breathing app you use?
Heart Rate Plus.
That's the one. Oh, it's breathing.
That is
breathing as
now.
well.
That's what it is.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. I'm going to shut Tanis down. She's just taking over. I'm just kidding, Tanis.
That's great. Does anyone else have any questions for Peter? So we've recorded this, so we'll post this to the page. So if there's something that Peter said you want to review again, it'll be
All right.
available.
Thank you all.
Thanks so much, Peter, for your
Yep.
time. Really appreciate
All
it.
right.
Yep.
Kip, I'll see you on the 18th.
I'm going to improve my lighting. It's the first boundary I'm going to push.
That's good. Yeah. Pay your electric bill
Thank you.
or get more assertive in the house.
Okay.
Work on
That's
that one.
good.
All right.
Thank you,
Work on that
everyone.
imagery.
Thank you, Jamie.